All right. Well, we're going to go ahead and get started, Jim. Hey, welcome
Yeah,
everybody. It's episode 8 of the Extraordinary Life Show, and Jim and I are here with a couple of esteemed guests. We've got Candy Staten here with us, as well as Matt Diebold, and we're excited about having an interactive show today. Are we not, Jim?
absolutely. That's the beauty of having interactive. It stimulates some answers that we wouldn't have come up with necessarily on our own because we're getting someone else's perspective. The whole point of this show today is success acceleration. How do you define success? And how can we help you get to that more rapidly? And when you look at success acceleration, there are a lot of moving parts because you could focus only on your financial success. You could focus on your visibility, the kind of acknowledgement you're getting in the marketplace. I was mentioning to David and to Candy earlier that I had the honor this morning of getting the news that I was just chosen, and I mean today, chosen as one of the top 100 sales influencers for 2017. And when I looked at the list, it's people like Grant Cardone with millions of followers and all that, so it's a pretty prestigious list to be on. What a thrill. That's success, but that doesn't necessarily put any money in your bank. So how do you measure success? Is it achieving acknowledgments like that? Is it making bigger bank deposits? Is it being more physically fit, being more admired by the people that you admire? Is it special privileges and breakthroughs? What is it? Promotions? So you define what success is. That's why I say in the self-motivation handbook, the number one question for the entire book, what do you want? Because until you know what you want, the rest of the world won't know. And if we don't know, then we can't help. And nobody makes it alone. So we all need the help of somebody else. So give some thought right now to how would you answer that question if you were on the air? What is success for you right now at this point in your life? And then we can focus on how we can help you get there more rapidly.
That's right. And, we built this show around the idea of helping people to live an extraordinary life, not only in their personal life, but in the marketplace. And so we're going to be bringing some strategies and tactics and answering some questions related to success acceleration inside the marketplace. We've got a couple of panelists here with us today that are in the marketplace that we have invited to jump on here with us and to share their questions or share their barriers that they're experiencing so that we can actually give them some strategy or some coaching tips to accelerate their success.
Well, let me throw that question to Matt and Candy. Matt, you first. How do you define success at the next step for you right now? Knowing it'll be different maybe next year, maybe it was different last year, but right now, what is success for you?
For me personally, it's just setting a goal and achieving it.
Okay, but be specific as to what you're talking about. That's conceptually a good definition of the word success, but I'm talking about Matt today gets to say, I want this, and then I'll get it. What is success?
I just ran the Pittsburgh Marathon. I started training 20 weeks ago, and so I completed it Sunday.
There you go. That's success.
It's a lot of hard work, but more than anything, it was dedication.
Yeah. That is the key, because it's not working hard that gets you fit enough to run a marathon. 26 miles plus change, just working hard wouldn't do that. As a matter of fact, I know friends who worked hard and injured themselves. So it's a combination of smart work and dedicated repetition of it over months of time to get your body to a point where you can endure multiple hours of nonstop running, right?
That's correct.
What would you add to that? What else is required?
Good coaching and good training. At 22 miles, I was pretty much ready to give up. And the guy who's been training me the whole time, I seen him standing on the corner in the city of Pittsburgh at mile 22, pumping his fist. And I was like a new man. I was like re-energized. I was ready to go.
That's what they call hitting the wall, right?
I hit the wall at 18.
Or did you?
That's hitting the wall. How
What
I got
is hitting the
I don't
wall?
remember. I don't remember getting to 22. I just remember seeing him under the sign, and I knew I had to get there.
Wow.
So yeah,
Wow.
it was a tough day.
Yeah.
Well, Matt and I have
What
been
made
talking
you
over.
stick with it?
Excuse me.
What made you stick with it?
You mean not quitting,
Yeah.
or like just Sunday, or the last 20 weeks?
Well, either way.
Well, for one, I didn't want to let myself down. It was a big goal. It was one of those goals that they say you set, and if it doesn't scare the pants off you, then it's not a good goal. Well, I didn't know how I was going to do it, but I was sure if I just put one foot in front of the other and went a little faster every day, I could get there. And it was just about writing it down, looking at it every day, and having a list of the work.
Well, you know, on the cover of this book, I've got a pair of running shoes. And the punchline, as you know, because you've read the book, is just put on your running shoes and step out the door. You know, people talk about, I can't motivate myself. Oh, my ankles are bad. Oh, I'm afraid I'll hurt my knees. I've heard that running's not good for you. Well, today's weather's not good. And, you know, I don't have much time. In other words, all the usual excuses. And my answer is just put on your running shoes and step out the door. You don't have to exercise. Just put on the shoes. Step outside. Then we'll talk. And
Well,
when you get outside, then you think, well, I could go to the corner. Well, I could go to the next tree. Heck, you know, I'm loosened up a little bit. I can make it to the bridge. Right? Do you do that?
Well, I'm not a superstitious person, but when I got your book, it was funny because the day before I got your book, I had to go to the running shoe store and get a new pair of shoes. And the only shoes they had in my size that day were the bright blue ones that looked like what's on the cover of your book. So
Wow.
I'm like, okay, this
Wow.
is weird. Is this a total coincidence, or do I really need to read this book and do it at the same time? So the book really encouraged me to stick with the goal.
Thank you. Well, I metaphysically control circumstances for people. And so I was in the store that day and I said, oh my God, that's one of my guys. Give him blue.
You're an inspiration to a lot of people.
Well, so are you, Matt. Thank you for that. Hey,
Well, Matt and I have been talking about over the last, probably a couple of months as he's been training for this marathon, just about, you know, some of the barriers that he's faced. And he started off with a group of 150 that were all committed to training for the marathon. And how many people actually ran, Matt?
In the group, we started out with about 150, and out of that group, I think 22 people were left. And out of that group, I think only 8 of us ran the full marathon. Everybody else decided to do a half or something less distance.
Now think about that for a second. These were not people, I'm guessing, who have less intelligence, less desire to succeed in life, less physical ability, or people who have more infirmities or more reasons not to. Chances are real good. It's just that you decided to actually complete it, and they decided to give it a shot.
That's
Think
true.
that's accurate?
That's exactly accurate.
Yeah. Well, let's get Candy in here.
Yeah.
Candy, welcome to the podcast. And do you have any questions for us, or an example that we can relate to as to what constitutes for success for you? Easy for me to say. What are you looking at next?
The next thing for me is to match my husband's income to bring him home from work, because right now he's traveling 100 miles to work one way every day. So he's driving 200 miles every day. And so needless to say, we don't get to spend a lot of time together.
Yeah.
So my next goal is to make enough money to replace his income so that he can come home. My ultimate goal is freedom, is to do what we want when we want.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, the nice thing about that is knowing what his income is gives you a hard target. You know what amount of money is required for you to get to the point that you've got a little bit of freedom, and then you can identify milestones beyond that. The thing about the question, what do you want, is most people answer, I want health, wealth, and happiness. In other words, I want to be healthy enough to not have pain or to be able to do things easily. I want to be wealthy enough to not have to worry about money, and I want to be happy instead of sad or afraid. Well, duh, so does every living person, plant, or animal on earth, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's just a general state of conditions desired by all people. But in your case, as we define success in a measure of generating the income that allows you and your husband to make a better choice, then you've got something that gives you the ability to start identifying the steps between you and there, and then start looking at what you're currently doing and identifying the leverageability of this activity, that activity, whether this is a customer that you can go deep with or a one-time transaction, etc. And you can start making better choices about everything you do and keep a measure of it in front of you every day and in front of your husband every day so that you can track the progress, kind of like those fundraising thermometers they have, you know, when they're raising funds for the United Way or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
The tracking is really important because things that are measured, no matter what they are, whether it's weight or income or number of times you made a phone call or whatever it happens to be, things that are measured tend to improve.
Okay.
Jim, you talk a lot about the idea of having a natural zone of optimum velocity and how that can actually speed up a person's ability to achieve what it is that they've created as a worthy ideal or goal, success. Talk a little bit more about that as it applies to Matt's situation and maybe what's next for him, and maybe health related or business related, and then we'll throw it back to Candy.
Well, let me first off define what this is. It's a concept from my book, The Acorn Principle, which is based on several years of psychological research with a team of researchers at Arizona State University in their psychological testing service. And I used to own a psychological research firm called the Carefree Institute in Arizona, Carefree, Arizona. And what research we did produced that book. I was frustrated that my work with Dr. Tony Alessandro, who's my best friend and at the time was my business partner, was limited to only personality types. And we had gone deep and wide in personality types, and we had recorded the first ever audio album on dealing with personality types, and it became a worldwide bestseller called Relationship Strategies, published by Nightingale Conant Corporation. Sold $3.5 million worth in the first 2 years it was out. And so we got to a decision point. Did we want to go deeper in that, or did we want to go somewhere else? Well, I wanted to explore new things because by that point, everybody was starting to talk about the 4 basic personality types, and everybody had their own assessment tools and all this, and I wasn't feeling unique anymore. So Tony decided to put all of his weight on that and build an online assessment company that is now a multi-million-dollar company and dealing with people worldwide. I, on the other hand, took my money and invested in new psychological research. And one of the things we researched was the concept known as personal velocity. Velocity is not speed. Velocity is your rate of progress toward your goal. In other words, success acceleration is achieving optimum velocity and sustaining it so that you can be at your best all the time. If you think of a car on a racetrack, say a NASCAR, going in a big oval, 200 miles an hour, velocity is 0 because they're not going anywhere unless there's an actual race with a finish line, okay? But going 1,000 miles an hour on a racetrack with no race means your velocity is 0, but your speed's 1,000 miles an hour. Well, that'll burn you out, right? So it's not about going as fast and hard as you can go. It's about figuring out what is your optimum velocity. Velocity is the energy and drive, the intensity in you that is natural. And it fluctuates in a zone between low velocity and high velocity. But in that zone, you are at your best. You're in your sweet spot. And you know when you're in the zone because everything's working and you feel like you could keep this speed forever. It's like cruising speed on a car, right? If you get below your zone, in other words, you don't challenge yourself enough, then you start experiencing a sense of boredom. And then if you stay in that lower end of your zone or below it, then the boredom turns into apathy and you think, who cares? You know, what's the use? And if you stay in the apathetic mode long enough, it deteriorates into depression and you have to go through a recovery cycle just to get back to the bottom of your own zone. On the other hand, at the top end of your zone, if you're pushing yourself too much, if you're taking on more than you can handle at this point with the resources and capacity you've got, then the first thing you experience is stress. And stress is not something you notice at first. Stress at first is just a state of being, but as the stress continues, what you experience is anxiety, and you start getting nervous and afraid, and you start making decisions out of fear instead of out of anticipation of something positive. And if you stay in that anxiety mode long enough, then the stress overwhelms you, and you burn out. And then you have to go through a recovery cycle just to get back to your zone, the bottom of your zone. So you can see that challenging yourself too little or too much is a bad idea. So everyone has his or her own natural velocity. There's a speed and pace that if you look back over your life and you study all the times you were doing well and doing poorly, you'll find that there is a pattern that you always were from your mid-youth through your adulthood, either a fairly high, fairly moderate, or fairly low velocity person naturally. That's fine. Doesn't matter whether you have low or high velocity. It matters whether you know what your zone of natural velocity is so that you can stay within it. I knew a guy who had low velocity naturally, but he worked on the trading floor of the New York Stock Exchange. You know, that's like a match working in a bomb factory. I mean, wow. This guy, I said, how could you take a job like that when your natural velocity is low? He said, well, I love the excitement. I said, when you come to work, are you the first person to initiate things? He said, no, that's what I like about the work. It ignites me. In other words, this guy didn't bring energy. He came there and received energy, okay? But at the end of the day, he had to go home and lay down to recover from a day's work. That shouldn't be the case. He was misplaced. He was in a job that was not right for him. He might have enjoyed it like a thrill ride for a while, but after a while, he was going to burn out and be in pretty bad shape.
I want to challenge you on something with that, Jim, and hold on just 1 second. And while I'm talking to you about that, I want Matt and Candy to think about the one big question that they have about success acceleration, and we'll wrap up with answering their 2 questions. But for those of you that are watching right now, if you would give us a thumbs up, give us an emotion, throw us a comment, and share this with somebody, or share this on your wall and tag us in it if you like it. We'd sure appreciate you liking our page. It's called Live the Extraordinary Life. If you type that up in the search bar, you can like our page. But the question I have for you, Jim, before we get to Matt and Candy, is what about guys like Matt, who just set this bar really high for themselves, or other athletes? I'm just using an example as a marathon. You know, Matt just did this big, huge, hairy, audacious goal. Or you could say like a performer, or any kind of peak performance star or business owner that has this huge run of success. How do you balance velocity with this idea of having a huge, big win? And when do you have to kind of take it a little bit slower before you go out there and set that next big goal and keep it the same pace? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, there's only so much energy that we have to expend. And that energy, there's 2 types of energy. There's emotional energy and there's physical energy. And you might have the physical energy to do something, but not have the emotional energy to sustain it. In which case, you're not going to succeed at it. You're going to stop early. You'll burn out or something. So if you recognize that a major goal like Matt's, like achieving, 26 miles, 365 yards or whatever that number is, successfully, is going to take forget the physical energy, that's the obvious. Take your emotional energy to a point where there's going to be a big payoff, a celebration, and there's an absolute need for you to get back into the zone from that explosive moment of celebration. And you're probably going to have, after something like that, a week or longer of just normalizing again on an emotional level so that you get back to where you're making good decisions for yourself. You're able to recommit to another goal. You know, there are a few hybrid mutants in the world, like the guy who ran a marathon every day for a year. I've forgotten his name, but oh my God. How can a human being do that? Evidently it's possible, but I sure wouldn't want to set it as a goal. You know, so that's a big factor. Matt, that concept of emotional energy and the need for a short recovery cycle, is that your experience? How does that match with your experience?
Well, I can only speak for, I was asked a question right after we were done and walking away, and the guy that ran with me, he said, so what's next? And I was so drained I couldn't think about walking back to the car.
Yeah.
So it's taken me this just happened Sunday. So I had talked to him this morning on the phone for a few minutes, and he said, how do you feel? How are your legs? How do you physically feel? And I said, better today than yesterday, but it's finally starting to sink in what I did. And now I'm starting to think, okay, like what's the next goal for me? Is it another personal, health goal? Is it a financial goal? I'm somebody who always has to be aiming for the next thing. That's just who I am. And if I don't have something to aim for, I feel lost.
Yeah. And if you're proactive like you, then that's an important part of life. I mean, everything you do needs to have some kind of a target in it that's desirable to you. So taking time to reflect on that experience is vitally important for you to notice your experience in training, notice your experience at the event, during the event, after the event, and to just let the natural processes happen and as you observe them, and then make new decisions after that. But rushing it would not work. It's kind of like trauma. You know, if there's a very scary or terrifying or painful experience you go through, you might intellectually rebound from it in a matter of hours or moments. But you won't emotionally rebound until your emotions go through their own time frame and recover and put you back on your game. And far too often we discount the importance of that. Like somebody goes through a near-death experience and we say, are you okay? And they say, yeah, meaning I don't have any obvious holes in my body, or I didn't break something or lose a limb. But they're not okay. They're not going to be okay until that recovery cycle, that healing process has taken place intellectually, emotionally, and physically. And for some people, it takes longer. For some people, not so long. But it's got to happen, and it happens on its own schedule. Same thing's true for grief. The grieving after the loss of someone or some important thing, that process has its own time frame, and we've got to respect the cycle and just make room for it as we make new decisions.
Yeah. Matt, do you have a big question in regards to success acceleration, or just anything that would be related back to achieving your goals in the timeframes that you'd like? Health or business related, doesn't make a difference.
Right now, I'm just, like I said, right now I'm in a mode where I'm just kind of trying to be a sponge and absorb what I just did. There's so many things that I have written on paper, but it's almost like I feel like I don't want to overwhelm myself too much. I want to kind of celebrate softly what I've done somebody had told me, I asked my coach, I said, when can I start running again? Like I'm ready to go, right? And I hadn't even run the marathon yet. And he said, there's a rule of thumb that for every mile you run, you're supposed to take 1 day off. So if you run 26 miles, take 26 days off because your body needs that rest. You also need time to absorb. That doesn't mean you become a couch potato, but I think for some folks that might be the case. You have a daily habit of doing something every day, and then you take 26 days away from it. You might just form a new habit of not doing something. It could be,
Right. 26 is a lot.
It could very well, be the case. So I'm sort of a kind of guy that, if you ask enough questions, you're going to find the answer. So I found some alternative answers to the take 26 days off. Some people agree with it, disagree with it. For me, I found that I don't necessarily need to take 26 days off and become complacent. I can actually do my training in reverse. So instead of going out and running a 10-mile run tomorrow just to stay healthy, I can go out. It's okay to go out and do a 1-mile run and start building back up in reverse to what I had done. Because when you run a marathon, the last 2 weeks of your marathon is called a taper. So you start tapering your mileage off. You start scaling back to get ready for the big run. And so now I'm kind of going in reverse. But for me, I want a week. I just want a week to just kind of celebrate what I had done and look at, like, I have a whole bunch of things written on paper. And I want a week to say, what are my top 3 things? And I'm going to pick one of those and say, that's the next thing. And that's what I'll start focusing on.
That's super.
Awesome.
And it really is important to do what Matt just said, and that is celebrate. Take time to savor your successes so that it's even sweeter as you move forward. A lot of people, they'll hit a goal and then they'll just push on beyond it and just assume that somehow that point that they accumulated will ultimately pay off at the right moment. No, you need to pause and reflect. Like my friend Kevin Buck says, he's a philosopher. He says, without reflection, there's no learning. And we really do need to get in the habit of noticing what we experienced and thinking about what does that mean. Because that's where learning takes place. Let's switch to Candy as we wrap this together.
Just one more. I want to have Matt give one principle. Matt, you've been a student of the Cathcart Institute and what Jim's been doing. You've had a chance to work with me on some coaching stuff. Talk about one thing that you could give another person out there that's trying to live a more extraordinary life from all the things that you've learned in your life and Cathcart Institute and all the things in between. Anything you can come up with?
Don't be afraid to ask questions.
Great. Fantastic. Thanks for being on with us today, Matt. We're going to throw it over to Candy and ask her for her one big question for success acceleration. Candy?
Okay. You said that you gave 2 kind of variants. Going below the line, you can get bored, and which leads to depression and then recovery, or pushing too much can cause stress and anxiety. Is there kind of a good rule of thumb to challenge? Because I've experienced the latter, pushing myself too hard, where I got stressed out and then anxious, and then it was like I got locked up and I couldn't move forward.
Yeah, burnout.
How can is there a good rule of thumb to challenge yourself and not go too far? Is there a good kind of...
Yeah, what I tend to do is I'm very self-aware. I've made a habit out of that over the last many, many years. I wasn't when I first started on this path, and I've learned to become more aware of myself. I've learned to notice, for example, if I'm holding tension in my upper body, notice that so I can relax. I notice my own vocal patterns. I tend to step back from time to time throughout the day and notice things about myself and about how I'm feeling and see if there's a relation between that and how I'm performing. So I would suggest that you begin expanding your self-awareness. Spend more time noticing about yourself throughout the day, and keep a journal on your reflections about the past experiences to teach you what were the times and the circumstances where the stress was too much and where it was too little. What are your symptoms of being in the zone for Candy, right? And that's something you have to learn through a study of yourself over time in actual practice. So you couldn't go into a clinic and get analyzed and come out knowing that. You have to actually observe the practice. It's kind of like watching your golf swing or your swimming stroke. You need to monitor the experience in the pool or on the golf course what are your feelings? What are you thinking? Where are you looking? Things like that. But you also need a videotape for an objective point of view or like when you're doing assessments, get a 360 from other people's input, what they think you're strong at or not as strong at, or what were moments when they saw that you were pushing it too much, and what were the symptoms. Because the main thing we're going to learn is what are the symptoms. Symptoms you feel, symptoms that others can observe. And once you know that, then you know how to say, I need to back off right now. Like years ago when my mother passed away in 2010, Paula, my wife, her mother passed away 13 days earlier. They lived 9 miles apart in Little Rock, Arkansas. I was flying from Vancouver, Canada to Santiago, Chile in South America doing speaking engagements. And my mom was in the hospital in Little Rock, and I had to swing through Little Rock between each of these major engagements. I tried to cancel the engagements, and my mother wouldn't let me. But I didn't even know Paula's mom was in crisis. I knew she was in a nursing home and not doing well, but I didn't know she was in crisis. So I'm in Little Rock, Arkansas, and taking care of my mom, and knowing I've got to hit the road in a couple of days. And then I learned Paula's mom has died. Oh my gosh. And then my mom, it becomes obvious she's in the death process. So it's basically a hospice experience with her. And I was very conscious, thank God, of the concept of personal velocity. And I knew that the impact of stressors on you, like the loss of a loved one, is number one major stressor. And below that are major life changes. Well, I had 2 within a matter of 13 days. And I was back there and I was going through my mom's things and donating some things and preserving others and passing others along to family members. And I remember Paula's family came in town gathering around her dad to prepare for her mom's funeral. And at one point, I just felt that feeling that you got too much. And I said, folks, I have to disengage. I'm sorry, I gotta go. Oh no, just stay around with me. Thank you, and I left. They were reassuring me, they were telling me, no, just stay here with us and we won't ask anything of you. It didn't matter if they were asking anything of me. There was an implied asking of me by my presence. I needed to be pleasant, I needed to be attentive, I needed to be quiet, I needed to be helpful, I needed to be something, right? But if I disengaged, I didn't need to be anything. So I went to a movie that I do not recall. And I sat in the dark alone and ate popcorn. And just that experience of disengaging completely and zoning out was enough to allow me to be a little bit more appropriate when I re-engaged with the family many hours later. And some of them understood and some of them didn't, and so be it, right? Because other people aren't always going to necessarily understand when you need to take care of yourself. Another quick idea. My wife, Paula, has a tolerance for human contact of 150 on a 100-point scale. She could be in a crowded elevator with other people she knew and trusted for the rest of her life and be okay with it, okay? I have a tolerance for human contact markedly below that. I may do a seminar for 6 hours for 1,000 people and have a level of human contact that would overwhelm most people. But at the end of that, I need time with no other expectations from any other human being. I need to withdraw and like emotionally heal, although it's not healing. I just need to get back into my zone. And if I don't have that decompressing time, I got a problem, because then I'll start showing it by being irritable or inconsiderate or impatient or something. So the habits I've developed over the years, jogging, that's a solo activity. I don't jog with a group. Hiking mountain trails. I go with a group, but I don't hike with the group. I hike alone. I hike my own hike. I see them at the end of the hike. David can attest to that. Riding a motorcycle. For more than 10 years, I would take off several days a week and ride my motorcycle on twisty roads alone for 2 or 3 hours and then come back to the office and re-engage. But that decompression time was vitally important for me, and I got some of my best ideas while doing that. Also, traveling alone is restful to me, whereas it's stressful for many people.
Yeah, well, a lot of the principles that Jim is sharing from his own personal life experience are documented in his best-selling book, The Acorn Principle, and he speaks specifically to the content of personal velocity inside that book. And so I think to summarize things today, we could say, know thyself to grow thyself. And we all have our own little things that we could maybe do a little differently. For Matt, it may be different than Jim or Candy in terms of how to deal with overcoming a big goal, or it may be something that, you know, for each of us, we can end up kind of sharing ideas. And I think that's what we did today, is we shared some ideas to hopefully learn from one another how we can build our own formula for success. And I hope that each and every one of you gained some value. If you did, please give us a comment down below in the Facebook feed, or you can share this and post your comments on your own wall to let other people know what we're doing in helping people to design extraordinary lives. If you join us next week, we're going to continue the conversation on success acceleration and talk specifically around intellectual bandwidth and your inner circle, and how the people that you spend the most time with oftentimes determine some of that velocity, and you have to be in more control of that. So if you'd like to learn more, join us next week, same time, 12 p.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Central Time. For Matt, Candy, and Jim, I'm Dave Bush. Thanks so much for joining us. And if you haven't had a chance yet to download our ebook, go to theextraordinarylife.com and pick up a copy, and we'll stay in touch with you with upcoming events and details. Thanks, everybody. Have a great Tuesday afternoon.
Thank you, Dave.